Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandra Cooling. I'm the Director of Information Governance at Sioux Valley Dakota Nation. I've been there for almost 5 years and been working on this project almost since the start. Today, I've asked Derek Rice to help with the presentation because he was a big part of choosing our software vendor. So he's going to talk more about that today. So here's just, I'm guessing a lot of you have maybe, I don't know, maybe no idea where we are. So you can see us down in the corner of Manitoba there. Part of our border is along the Assiniboine River to the right there. We're 38 square kilometers. And most of the housing is in kind of what we would call a downtown core area, but does spread out to each end of the reserve. So we're just going to do a quick bio, Derek and I. As I mentioned, I started in 2019. I started with Sioux Valley because they knew they needed to keep track of information. They just didn't know what information, and honestly, neither did I when I started. I had done lots of work with other First Nations communities. I'd written, software for child and family services, for DOCFS. I had my own business for a while writing software. And I had worked with Sioux Valley on an HR program that I'd written for them, which is kind of how I got into Sioux Valley to begin with. That's kind of my story in a nutshell. Derek, go ahead if you want to add yours.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Derek Rice, and I'm a senior researcher with the Firelight Group, formerly with Big River Analytics. And my experience has primarily been in socioeconomic research, but I've also walked with several First Nations in implementing data governance structures, setting up information systems, and then also developing policies and procedures. And so Sandra asked me to come in, like she had said, to support her in this project and support the nation in the project.
Oh, so here's how Derek and I usually met, as most of us are used to now, right? We Zoom meetings all the time. The little picture on the left is kind of corny, but it's kind of funny. It was a picture frame that I had, and back when we started Zoom meetings, right, we were doing them every day for 2 years there. I took the time because my printer was right beside me, and I stuck the data equals evidence in this picture frame, and I've had it in my office ever since. It's kind of my motto for information governance. So here's a picture of where I started. This is the record storage shed on the left that I began with. There are other storage locations, but this is kind of where the main, where finance was putting their stuff and other people. I mean, looking at that mess, it was hard to tell whose was whose. So the picture on the right is what I did one summer. The school was nice enough to let me borrow the gym. So I had a big car back then. I loaded up hundreds and hundreds of boxes. I took them over to the gym. I spread them out. I sorted through them. I got rid of what I could, right? A lot of it had retentioned out. So I had about 70 boxes of files that I shredded. I took a lot of it to recycling. There was a lot of stuff that was duplicates. Or no, I shouldn't necessarily say duplicates. I should say manuals, things that, if someone else read it, was not proprietary or confidential information whatsoever. So I was able to recycle a lot of it. As you can imagine, looking at that, a lot of it was garbage, right? We had mice that got in. We had a hole in the roof. So we had, a lot of damaged records and a lot of damaged boxes and a lot of just garbage. So anyways, the storage shed looks somewhat better now. I think Amanda would agree to that. You can get in the door and you can walk in between the aisles anyway. So we are slowly getting there. Amanda and I have been back there several times, bring boxes back. She's scanning them and saving them to our software system. But anyways, this is where the process started. So you can go to the next slide, please. So our project timeline, as you know, we were all given 15 hours of expert hours to start the project. So I started out with Alex Kerr from Envision. She helped us develop kind of a framework, kind of I guess I should say a kind of a go forward. Here's kind of the plan for how you're going to roll this system out. So that's where my expert hours went. So that gave me a good guideline. We identified, a need for software, right? We had no software. All of our records were being stored in boxes in a storage shed, which would have been difficult to ever find if you ever needed it again, obviously. So obviously that was a need. We knew we needed something where we could search for documents, implement retention schedules to get rid of documents at the right time. I started about this time to take ARMA courses from ARMA, thanks to Jen Jansen for being the expert on the subject. She was the one who told me that ARMA Canada is where you want to be if you need to learn about records management. So I started taking online courses through privacy and all the other things about development. I got my information governance professional accreditation, and that helped. But again, that's I would always defer to Jen Jansen when it comes to anything RIM related, because she's the expert in the field.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So we started implementing our plan, obviously with our record storage shed, and then coming up with a software requirements list. I got Derek involved. He helped me develop a recorded information management policy, which I got approved by our chief and counsel. And it's kind of funny, recorded information management, they signed the policy, but I still to this day have never had any of them come ask me anything about it. So, this is just such an emerging thing that people even don't necessarily know what it is. But anyways, I hired Derek to help me because I knew I needed to find some software. Derek, I don't know, do you want to go talk a little bit about that software project?
Sure. Yeah, I think just what Sandra was alluding to there, a lot of this work is really taken for granted in a lot of cases. It's sort of something that's unsung, and often we rely on these information systems and these policies and procedures to protect the data and to protect the records and make sure that they're accessible. But it's often, like I said, just something that's taken for granted, and so. But there is a need for a structure for it to address it systematically, just like Sandra has with Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, and Sandra and Amanda. That process, it is very valuable, even though it's not necessarily obvious to the citizens or to the staff and possibly the leadership as well. But in terms of some of the software selection, I can just mention that Sandra had done a lot of the legwork to start off. So identifying what the feature requirements were for the software. So really having a good sense of what the nation needed in terms of the recorded information management. But one of the challenges with this is just identifying the category of software. There's so many different names for this. So you can use enterprise content management, document management software, recorded information management. And so and again, this isn't something that's just really obvious, where that sits or where that resides on the internet and who the providers would be for that. So Sandra asked me to come in and support the identification of the feature set, make sure that it was complete, and then also look at evaluating some of the vendors. So I did an additional search to find other vendors that could provide a similar set of features that Sandra had identified, and then came up with a list of questions that we could ask the vendors. So do this, have them take the time to answer the questions without us being there to prepare, and answer the questions, send us a document with their responses. And so some of the questions that we were asking them were along the lines of who owns the data? So this is Sioux Valley Dakota Nation data that would be stored on the system. And then we were curious to know if they actually had explicit statements around data sovereignty, for instance. And then we asked them who within their companies would have access to the data and what they would do with it. So if you think about some of the big companies like Google and Microsoft, they're content companies, right? So part of what they do is they provide a service such as Microsoft Office and Google Docs or Google Cloud. But also what they do is they mine the data and use it for artificial intelligence or other types of means like that. And we wanted to know that the companies that would be contracted to Sioux Valley didn't do that. And so these are not, like, typically the companies are not content companies. And so that's not part of their business to mine the data for some other purpose, such as AI, like I mentioned. So we had come up with that short list, 3 vendors that seemed to fit all those feature lists. We sent them those questions. They sent us a response, and then we held a series of interviews with them and just walked through. And they could, and then they also provided a demonstration of their software. And so we were able to evaluate really thoroughly the solutions that they were providing. Did you want me to talk a little bit about the policy development as well, Sandra? Do you think that would
Please,
help?
I think that would be useful for the group.
Yeah, so taking a look at the draft policy that had been developed, what my role was to look at how that would fit sort of with wise practices. So what other First Nations and Indigenous governments had set up in their own recorded information management policies, and then also relying on other information. So nicely, there are some data. There's some best or wise practices that are available freely on the internet. And it just have to know where to find it. And so look to integrate some of that. So I made some recommendations in terms of that, in terms of the policy, but then also looking at the legal landscape, the legislative landscape, and it's not straightforward. So sort of similar to the enterprise content management. First Nations, Indigenous governments, unfortunately, are not really the primary concern when it comes to a lot of privacy legislation or records management legislation. And so, trying to find out what legislation would apply and how that could get, whether or not that would need to get considered within the policy. And so we'd spent a little bit of time thinking about all of that, and made some recommendations that got integrated into the final policy that went to council for approval.
All right.
So I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. So in the end, we chose a company called Square 9. We were very conscious that we had to have our data reside in Canada, so that really narrowed down the number of companies we could look at. Square 9 has a representation in Winnipeg, and actually one of our community members works for the company that brokers out the Square 9 software. So that's what we decided to use. It was about this time that I was able to hire Amanda Ledoux as our records technician, and thank God she came along, because she has just taken that job and run with it, and just is doing a fantastic job digitizing the records from Sioux Valley. We have a lot of historical documents that she's reading through and digitizing. We've also just recently started, we have a bunch of VHS tapes and mini DVs, that are marked poorly what they are. And so we've shipped them off and had them digitized, again, just for, a corporate memory and for people to be able to look back at these documents and just see what the situation actually was like. We've got documents, I think, back to late 1800s. So if you could just go to the next screen, please. I'm just going to show you a little bit about how our document management, how Square 9 works for us. So here's a document that Amanda has digitized, and if you read it, it's grim, right? This person had to get a pass to leave the reserve, and for a period of 1 week, for the purpose of visiting. It's hard to believe that this was the case. And so it's important to document these kind of things to see that, yeah, that's actually how it was. That's what the community was just dictated. anyways, good historical document to keep. You can see along the right there, we've got tagging in the system. So this is kind of how we're able to store our documents. So, we categorize everything by many things, by the department, a category, we put department dates in there, locations, names where we can, so that in future, when we want to go search for a document like this, we can find all the documents like this in one nice, neat place. Behind it, I think you can maybe see a little bit of across the top, all the categories. So the screenshot that I took was the administration. So you can kind of see behind that under administration, housing, lands, climate change. Those are all the departments that we have under administration. And it tells you how many records that we have in each one of those categories. So from within the software, you can search for documents, you can pull them up on the screen and read them. You can export them or send them to someone else. And I mean, it's a big database, right? You could sort and categorize however you want. And I'm hoping that this is going to be useful. One thing that I did use it for was some professional development money that I got. Because you want to be able to track and report on stuff, right? So I tracked all the invoices that I got towards this project. And then anyone can come along after me and see what all was done in this project. I think maybe we called it RIM project. I can't remember. Amanda probably knows. But so I could go look at all the invoices and any notes I might have recorded in there too. So it was a good way to group and to be able to report on information. Next screen, please. So the benefits of this, obviously, is being able to pull together documents related to a topic, right? One of the things that recently came up is, we're looking at a healing lodge, and the director of health got a hold of me about, what information do we have? And it turned out that we had like hundreds of pages of documents. They've been looking at building a healing lodge in Sioux Valley for the last probably, 30 years. And so a lot of studies have been done, a lot of reports have been finished. And so it was very useful for them. They had at least a starting point. They had all this information about what had been done already, so they didn't have to recreate the wheel, because I think we all find that when people leave a position, sometimes all that information goes with them. And hopefully with our system, we can keep a lot of that information for the next people who are going to need it. Yeah, so I mentioned about the funding, right? I think it was maybe John who said he had a program developed just specifically to look at grant funding, or specifically to keep track of grant funding. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this program as well, is to track funding so that reporting is easier and better for the people who need to do it. So those are kind of the direct benefits. The indirect benefits, eliminating a need for paper copies. I'm sure everyone has a record storage shed that at one time looked like the one I came into. And if we can digitize a lot of stuff, everyday stuff, if we can digitize that and not have to keep those paper records, that is a huge bonus. It is hard to keep paper, and it is hard to find paper unless you've got stuff in boxes with barcodes on it and corresponding software to find that barcode when you need it. Having it digitized is way simpler. Kind of the unforeseen benefits of it is having historical documents available for future generations, right? It's also, I guess I mentioned this, an additional means of managing contribution agreements. And as far as unforeseen benefits go, I suspect I can't foresee what other benefits it's going to have, but I certainly hope it's going to benefit future generations at Sioux Valley. And the next screen, please. So here's the kind of our challenges and our lessons learned. Consultants can be used to validate your decisions. Well, Derek, Do you have more to add on that? I mean, having Derek, having someone, an expert come along and help with that was just so important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really the consultant's role is to provide advice and solve problems, of course, but it's also to round things out and maybe formalize the process and to just help to kind of shape and identify what the risks and rewards or costs and benefits of different approaches might be. And uh, I think so, Sandra, I think you're going to speak to this, but certainly, you're not interested in becoming a specialist in this particular software, right? So so by kind of leaning on some experiences that I had or that the consultants would have, that's where sort of a value is in bringing somebody in, is that you can kind of learn from their experiences without having to go through those experiences yourself. And so that's really a critical part of that process, I think.
Right. So some of the challenges, well, lessons learned, I guess. So Square Nine, of course, told us, oh yes, of course, yeah, the software has that capability. Yeah, you can do that with the software. Yeah, you can do that. But when I came to actually do those things, I realized that I needed to be the programmer who did those things. That yes, I could definitely do it, but I needed to be very, like, way more involved than I wanted to be in the software, in writing a retention schedule, for example. I mean, if this was my only job, I could do it, right? I could learn the software and um, I could write a retention schedule, but it's very demanding learning is what it is to do it well. Um, I expect that Amanda eventually is going to be that expert that will be able to do all those things. So, but anyways, I mean, that's the challenge I'm up against right now, is trying to write a retention schedule into the software. Maybe hard to implement. This was not necessarily a hard to implement software per se, but I think it's, like I said, it's going to take a lot of learning to take it any further. Amanda's been busy getting stuff into the system, but we haven't really tested it as much as I would have liked to. But hopefully that can happen in the future. We did discover that the system doesn't accept certain types of video files. For example, one of the things that, who would ever have guessed that up front? But once I had some of those VHS tapes transferred over, we couldn't put those video files in there. So that was a lesson learned. One of our challenges, and I'm sure it's a challenge everywhere, is capacity. Ideally, I wanted finance to be sending us invoices, and the finance department is stretched so thin that they can't commit to doing that, to doing those things, right? So trying to train other departments to send us the records that we need has seemed impossible. Our staff turnover is very high. So, you lose the knowledge that they have. And the other thing is, yes, I did not have time to become a document management expert in this job. It's a challenge because people don't necessarily see the value in what you're doing. They see you hounding them for reports. They think you're just, I don't know what it is, right? But they seem to think that I'm trying to get them to send me stuff just because I like doing it. I don't know. But anyways, it definitely is a challenge, and change management is probably an important part of this process to get people to understand what it is you're doing and why you're doing it and why it's important to do it right. The other thing is, currently we're kind of struggling with, we're not sure what documents need to be kept in for how long, because Indigenous governments are just so different in what we do and what's important. It was hard to, it's been hard to decide on a retention schedule and to put all the documents that we have into a category and say, yeah, okay, that makes sense to only keep that record for that long. So we're still struggling with that. And I think that's kind of where I have to stop, because that is where we're at, is coming up with a retention schedule that makes sense for Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, that we can everyone can live by. And we have to get buy-in from leadership to do that. And we have to get buy-in from all the programs to implement it. And those are our biggest challenges right now. Anything else you wanted to add there, Derek? I feel like you and I had a plan about how this was going to go, and I'm flustered and I've just raced through it and not given you your opportunity to speak. So please go ahead.
It's great. No, I think you're doing really well. It's very clear. The only thing I would say is just to reinforce, and I think Sandra has made this clear, but the Square 9 system is it is very different than let's say a network drive, a shared drive. It's not one drive. It's much more than that, right? So the amount of work that goes into configuring that system, to planning the configuration of it, and then actually implementing and configuring it so that it serves the purpose that you've set out to accomplish, that's very challenging. So the system is designed to collect all of this metadata. So use data about the file name, use data about the date that it was scanned, and all those tags that were highlighted in some of those images. And then it's also designed to really digitize the content of all the files as well. So that's very different than what you might have with OneDrive or another product that's freely available, under another service type of agreement. And the purpose for that is accessibility. So your ability to search all of that. But because of the number of ways that you could possibly go about doing that, it certainly does complicate things. It makes it very difficult, and the considerations that have to go into that are somewhat overwhelming. And so they do promise you the moon. When we're sitting in that demonstration, they went for long periods of time talking about all the sorts of features that are available. But one thing it's certainly not easy or obvious to know how long it would take to implement some of the features that are available. So it's not straightforward to kind of think about that. And I'll also just mention that part of the process of implementing the software, to get the contract in place, we had to go through a very lengthy scope of work negotiation with them. And they dotted every I and crossed every T, and they had everything planned out to basically to the day of the month. And it was pretty challenging to stay on top of that, just because not having implemented that particular package before, or that software before, it wasn't straightforward to know whether or not you could meet their deadlines. So just sharing a little bit about the overall experience with the vendor itself. Yeah, so I think that pretty much, I just wanted to add that, Sandra.
Thank you. Yep, and our last slide is just I should get Amanda. She was coaching me how to say this word, pedamier. Amanda, can you please pronounce that word for me? Pedamia. Oh, maybe she's not there. Anyways, it's thank you in Dakota. Pedamaye. Thank you. And this is just a picture of some of the white buffalo in Sioux Valley. We have, I don't know, 8 or 9 white buffalo out there now. So this is just a picture of a little calf. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm willing to answer any questions to the best of my ability.
If I could just mention, Sioux Valley Dakota Nation territory is really beautiful, right? And along the Trans-Canada and along the Assiniboine. And so Sandra had shared that photo of us on Zoom, and certainly that was the way that we met. But earlier this year, we did have an opportunity. I came out to the nation and met Sandra and Amanda and many other people from the community. And like I said, it's definitely a beautiful country for sure. And if you have a chance to go out and visit, I would recommend it. And it's nice to see the buffalo certainly on the territory.